More than 4 months have passed since Nancy Guthrie was reportedly taken from her home, and despite extensive public attention, there has still been no announced arrest, no publicly identified suspect, and no clear explanation of what happened that night. Now, a new development is raising an important question among those closely following the case. Could private investigators uncover information that has remained hidden for more than 120 days? It is a question worth examining because private investigators often enter cases at a very specific point. The initial searches have already taken place. Law enforcement has followed leads. Witnesses have been interviewed. Evidence has been collected. Yet the answers that families desperately need remain frustratingly out of reach. Publicly available information suggests that reports have circulated regarding private investigators becoming involved in efforts related to the Nancy Guthrie case. Authorities have not confirmed every detail surrounding those reports, but the discussion itself has prompted renewed interest in what additional investigators might be able to contribute. Does their involvement suggest new momentum? Could fresh eyes identify details that have been overlooked? Or does it simply reflect a family determined to explore every possible avenue in the search for answers? Those questions matter because history has shown that some investigations benefit when additional resources are brought into the picture. Sometimes new information emerges. Sometimes witnesses come forward. Sometimes investigators discover connections that previously appeared insignificant. And sometimes a case that seems stuck begins moving again. Today, we're taking a closer look at the role private investigators can play, where they may focus their attention, and whether their involvement could potentially generate new leads in the ongoing search for answers about Nancy Guthrie. Because while many questions remain unanswered, one fact remains unchanged. The search continues. Nancy Guthrie's family continues to seek answers. Investigators continue their work. And people across the country continue following a case that remains both troubling and deeply mysterious. As of today, publicly available information suggests that many of the same questions that existed during the early stages of the investigation remain unresolved. What happened that night? Who may have been responsible? Was there a detail that has yet to be fully understood? And perhaps most importantly, where can investigators look next? To understand why private investigators might matter, it helps to first understand where this case stands today. Imagine a quiet neighborhood during the early morning hours. The streets are mostly empty. Porch lights glow softly against the darkness. Vehicles sit motionless in driveways. Everything appears normal. Yet according to investigators, somewhere within that ordinary setting, events unfolded that would eventually trigger an investigation attracting national attention. Since then, countless hours have been devoted to finding answers. Investigators have reviewed evidence. Search efforts have taken place. Information has been analyzed. Yet the mystery remains. One aspect of this case continues to stand out. People have not forgotten Nancy Guthrie. In many missing person investigations, public attention gradually fades. Media coverage becomes less frequent. Discussions become less active. People move on to other stories. That has not happened here. Nancy's name continues to appear in discussions. Questions continue to be asked. Family members continue seeking answers. Supporters continue sharing information. And that ongoing attention may prove important. Because public awareness often plays a larger role in investigations than many people realize. A witness who stayed silent may decide to speak. Someone who overlooked a detail may suddenly remember it. A conversation that once seemed meaningless may take on new significance. Investigations are often built from small pieces. One observation. One phone call. One memory. One overlooked detail. That raises another important question. What exactly do private investigators do differently? Many people imagine private investigators operating like characters in television dramas. The reality is usually much less glamorous. Most experienced private investigators spend long hours reviewing information. They examine timelines. They revisit witness accounts. They verify details. They look for inconsistencies. And perhaps most importantly, they ask questions repeatedly. Sometimes the same question must be asked several different ways before a useful answer emerges. Picture a large conference table covered with documents. Photographs spread across one side. Maps marked with notes. Timelines highlighted with different colors. Witness statements stacked neatly in folders. A private investigator may spend hours reviewing material that has already been examined numerous times. Not because previous investigators failed, but because every investigator notices different things. A timeline gap that appears insignificant to one person may catch another person's attention immediately. A witness statement may contain a detail that becomes important when combined with new information. A relationship that once seemed unrelated may suddenly appear relevant. This is one reason fresh perspectives sometimes matter. Experienced investigators understand that solving difficult cases often requires persistence. The process is rarely dramatic. More often, it involves patience, careful review, repeated analysis, and a willingness to challenge assumptions. Would you continue looking at the same information after 4 months if there were still no answers? Most investigators would say yes. Because difficult cases are often solved by people who refuse to stop asking questions. Another area where private investigators often focus attention involves relationships. Not because relationships automatically indicate wrongdoing, but because understanding a person's life helps investigators understand their circumstances. Who regularly interacted with Nancy? Who knew her routines? Who spoke with her recently? Who may possess information that investigators still need? These questions form the foundation of many investigations. Private investigators frequently create detailed relationship maps. Friends, family members, neighbors, co-workers, acquaintances. Anyone connected to the individual's daily life may become part of that process. The goal is not to accuse. The goal is understanding. People leave traces of their lives through conversations, routines, habits, and interactions. Sometimes those traces reveal important information. Sometimes they do not. But experienced investigators know that every possibility deserves careful examination. While authorities examined those possibilities, another question emerged. Could witnesses provide additional information now that more time has passed? That may seem unlikely at first. After all, memories generally fade over time. But investigators often discover that people remember details later that they initially overlooked. Imagine sitting at your kitchen table months after an event occurred. A news report appears on television. A photograph is shown. Suddenly, something comes back to you. Maybe it was a vehicle parked somewhere unusual. Maybe it was a conversation. Maybe it was someone walking through an area at a particular time. At first, the memory seemed unimportant. Now it feels different. That happens more often than many people realize. This is why investigators frequently encourage the public to continue sharing information, even months after an investigation begins. One tip may not seem significant by itself. Combined with other evidence, however, it could become much more important. The exact details remain unclear regarding what information investigators currently possess. Authorities have understandably kept many aspects of the investigation confidential. That is common in active cases. Protecting sensitive information can be critical. Yet the lack of public information often creates frustration. Families want answers. Communities want answers. The public wants answers. And every day without those answers can feel incredibly long. For Nancy Guthrie's loved ones, the passage of time likely brings both determination and uncertainty. Each morning begins with the same unanswered questions. Each evening ends with those same questions still waiting. That emotional reality helps explain why some families eventually seek additional investigative resources. Not necessarily because they have lost faith in law enforcement. Not necessarily because mistakes have been made. But because doing something often feels better than doing nothing. The search for answers becomes a full-time commitment. And when that happens, additional investigators can provide additional effort. As we continue examining the potential role of private investigators in the Nancy Guthrie case, another important question remains. If experienced investigators were reviewing this case today with completely fresh eyes, where would they begin? That question may ultimately provide the clearest understanding of whether new leads could still emerge after more than 4 months of uncertainty. And that is exactly where we will continue next.